$200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! The king!
Only for Super NES.
Only on Super NES.
You're listening to the SNES podcast with your host, Soul Blazer.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Super NES Podcast, episode 157 at this time. That's 157. I am Greg, joined always by my faithful co-host, Joe.
Hello.
And we are very pleased today to have the first of what's hopefully going to be many guest host appearances on the podcast for 2021. I've been teasing it for a while. It's been in the works. The pandemic's not helped things one bit. But we have a bunch of people who are hopefully going to be coming on the podcast in the months to come for guest hosts. And I'm honored to be joined today by somebody who has been a co-host with us in past podcasts, but making his first time appearance on this podcast. I'm very pleased to introduce Ollie, coming at us all the way from Ireland. So, hello Ollie, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today.
Top of the morning to yous, lads.
Evening for you, actually, right?
It is actually the mid-evening. And then I realized sometimes when I do this on a podcast where like people go, introduce yourself, I'll put on a stereotypical Irish accent, and then it hits me after about 5 seconds. I sound 100% Irish all the time. I don't have to say top of the morning to you for people to realize this lad's from Ireland.
Well, that's cool. I mean, because it's been a while since we had a European on the podcast, and of course, we were talking a little bit about this before the recording. The Super NES was not as popular in Europe, playing in Europe as it was in the United States, like in Japan. So it's always interesting to hear different perspectives, perspectives like whatnot. So, we allowed Joe to pick the. We allowed Ollie to pick the game for this podcast. He wanted to talk about Cannon Fodder, which is a very interesting game in its own right. But we'll get into Cannon Fodder here in a little bit. Cannon Fodder is definitely one of those British design, British sensibility games. So it'll be interesting to see how how we think about it across cultural lines, like whatnot. But anyway, Ollie, why don't you introduce yourself? Introduce yourself a little bit. Feel free to talk about your background and what you want to talk about, and also talk about your experiences like Super NES, like growing up, like whatnot for us.
Yeah, so I'm Irish, as you can tell from the introduction. I have a PhD in physics, if that's worth anything, and I teach. I teach the equivalent of high school, but it's maybe the level above high school, so the community college level of physics to students over here, which basically means I'm a giant nerd. I've always been a giant nerd. I've always read fantasy novels. I've always read science fiction. I've always watched Star Trek. I always loved Star Wars, etc. And I've always been a gamer. Like I've always, wanted to play video games. And when I was a kid, so I'm just a little bit older than Joe, and I won't give my age relative to Greg, but growing up in the 80s and 90s, I was living through the golden age of Sega Mega Drive versus SNES. And also because over in Ireland and England, we just called it the SNES. I know people don't like to call it that, but that's just so ingrained in my mind that it's the SNES because everybody over here calls it that. So if I slip and accidentally call it the SNES, I don't want any of your listeners writing in going, "How dare he? How dare he besmirch the Super NES?" But that's what we always called it growing up. And yeah, it's just a fantastic little system. I didn't have one as a kid. I was a PC Master Race before it was cool to be a PC Master Race guy. So I had like a little Olivetti 286 PC. That's 260 or 286 bits, guys. Like that's how powerful that machine was. Like, and it was able to play tons of video games, etc. And I didn't start getting into any sort of console gaming until like 1995, 1996, when some of my friends had SNESs or Mega Drives, and I'd go round to their house and actually be able to just insert a cartridge and the game would start. Whereas even back then, as a PC user, you'd put your 3.5-inch floppy in, or back in the days, the 5.25-inch big discs into your drive, and there might be a 45-minute, 50-minute setup process. Making sure everything was right, making sure that if you had any sort of graphics card or audio card set up, and to just go around to a person's house and him to say, all right, so do you want to play some Streets of Rage? And then it's like a one insert process start button, and then suddenly you're playing. Or let's play Super Street Fighter, or Street Fighter 2, which is the best version of that game on the SNES, and you just put it in and it's just smooth. So yeah, that's where I came to with the SNES, was having spent years being, I've got a PC, I don't need any of those consoles. To then realize, oh wait, this is like I just put the cartridge in and suddenly you're gaming thing. This is taking all of the troubles and difficulties. And also, I'd never really had a controller before. I'd always been a keyboard and mouse guy, or just keyboard and arrow keys to move your guy on the screen. Controllers are awesome. Like, when you finally get one in your hands, I'm like, oh, so the left thing here makes me move, and then the buttons make me do stuff. Well, this is better than trying to figure out what WASD is using, and am I using Control and Shift and Alt to do stuff? So yeah, that's where I came with the SNES, and then I managed to convince my parents to get me one in like 1996. PlayStation 1 was already out at that stage when I was getting my first SNES.
So, do you remember? I don't know if they. So I don't know if they released this version in Europe. Did you have? So did you have the redesigned Super NES? Yeah, the Mark II version.
We had. So you guys had the one with the purple bits at the front.
Yeah, that was the original version.
Yeah,
Yep.
we never had that. We had the sleeker version.
Exactly.
Which is a cool looking version, I think.
It is, yes, I think so too. It's more, it's closer to the Japanese version than it was here. But they did like re-release the Super NES around the time period in a like a more sleeker European like format. At least here in the States. I don't know if that version came out over in Europe either.
No, I don't think it did. I've only ever really seen the one version over here.
Okay.
So almost all PAL SNESs look exactly the same. And when the mini SNES was released there a couple of years ago, we had our version of it was the European version as well.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
Which, by the way, is also a really good console if anyone's going to get one. Like.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, Joe and I both have them.
Yeah.
Yep. So what games in the system became your favorites?
So I'm a nerd, right? But I'm also, as I said, I love Star Wars. So Super Star Wars, Super Empire Strikes Back, Super Return of the Jedi, hard as nails, right?
Yeah.
Fantastic games, though. Just so much fun. I was a big fan of side-scrolling beat-em-ups. And I was a big fan of fighting games in general, and side-scrolling shooters like the equivalent of R-Type. Like, all of these things were brilliant to me. Those were basically games I really liked. But my all-time favorite game is made by the same company that made the game we're going to talk about today. So they did a version of soccer called Sensible Soccer.
Yes.
Yep. I put unlimited hours into this. So Greg, I know, for example, that we both listen to the Level podcast.
Yes.
And recently, it's in the last year, they had one of their multiplayer sections was about what game have you put the most hours into it. And the hosts were laughing because I said, I think conservatively, I've put 10,000 hours into Sensible World of Soccer. I am 100% certain I've put 10,000 hours plus into Sensible World of Soccer. Because there were years there. So from 1996 is the version I have, 96, 97. It was the game I played as I've got downtime for an hour, what will I do? Sensible World of Soccer 1996, 97. Every day, 1-2 hours a day for years. Absolute years thrown on top of it. And it's not even like, I'm saying it's 10,000 hours. There's a good chance it's 15 to 20,000 hours I put into that. I once played a game against a friend blindfolded because it gets into you reach the point. I mean, I didn't win. I lost. I'm not Daredevil of Sensible Soccer, but I was able to hold him to a particular, I think it was 2-0 or something. He beat me, but I was able to do that just because the movements in the game are fixed, And when you've put that much time into it, you know exactly how fast your guy can run and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that would have been my favorite game, and the version of it on the SNES is excellent. Again, absolutely rock hard, but excellent.
Yeah, we actually, yeah. So I actually was going to talk about that a little bit here, because Ken Fodder does use the same engine for Sensible Soccer, just modified stuff. So I was going to talk about that here, in a bit, but yeah, that's cool. So, do you do much of emulation? Because of course, I'm sure that there's a whole bunch of great games that didn't come out in Europe. So that only came out North America, for example. So, do you use emulation to?
Yeah.
A fair bit.
Around about, I'm trying to think, 2006, 2007 maybe. One of the students that I had a little gaming group in school, and one of the students came up to me at the time and was like, Mr. Brady, we can do those all on the PC and we can set up controllers. And I was like, tell me more. And and he showed me how to get SNES and stuff like this down. And yeah, so I mean, I have them. They're basically on every PC I own has a working emulator where I can just randomly decide, hey, I'm going to put in 25 minutes and I'm going to play some Street Fighter 2. It's brilliant.
No. Right. Let me also ask you, because because there's something that I always ask Europeans about, because it's very interesting to hear their thoughts about this. You are aware, of course, the differences. Acutely aware, I'm sure, about the differences between NTSC versus PAL format.
Yeah.
So I know a bunch of people who are both gamers and collectors in Europe, that partly because of that, they prefer to collect only an NTSC. Only an NTSC format. Their whole collection is, even though it's easier for them to get European stuff, they want to get American stuff because of that. So, do you have a preference to which format that you enjoy playing in, or do you carry the way, or what's your thoughts about that?
Well, see, this is a hard one. This is one of those things where if you're used to something, that becomes what you see as being the correct version of it. So I grew up with PAL versions of games, so it's noticeable on the SNES. I mean, I've been on your PlayStation podcast back in the day, PlayStation Power, and it was way more noticeable in PlayStation games. But to me, the PAL version will always be the correct version. Everything else just looks a little bit off. The animations are a little bit too smooth. The size of the screen is a little bit wrong aspect ratio. So yeah, I prefer the PAL versions. I'm not going to be speed running any games anytime soon, so I don't need that smooth 60 frames. So yeah, I prefer the PAL version if I can get it.
Yeah, because actually, because I wanted to ask a question partly because the fact that I think it's I was going to bring it up later on talking about the game itself, but also because it's kind of interesting to hear about that. So because modern games really don't have that issue nowadays, do they? I mean, I know So I know the format's still around, but nowadays, because of TV sets and converters and whatnot, it's not really an issue.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be. I can't remember the last time hearing about a game being region locked.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure if it happens anymore.
Probably the PS2 era, I think. There was a couple PS2 games that were region locked. That's about it.
Yeah. I know this is not the podcast part, but just I remembered something from the PlayStation and how the correct version. I played Metal Gear Solid in black and white the first time I played it because my color TV broke. So the only TV I had in my room, I shared a room with my brother, and we had the little black and white TV. And I remember hooking it up and playing PlayStation 1 Metal Gear Solid. It completely changes the experience of the game. It's like you're in a Cold War era spy movie then suddenly.
Yeah.
And I've gone back and done that again because in my head, Solid Snake is grey and slightly whiter grey. And when I finally saw it in all its beautiful colors and blues, it just looked off to me. Like, so yeah, I prefer PAL versions of games the same as I prefer a black and white version of Metal Gear Solid, just because I'm used to it. And
yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I mean, like I said before in the past, I spent a lot of time playing Doom as a kid because Doom was very popular as a teenager, and it's like my computer at the time only had an ad-lib card. Mm-hmm. So it's like, even to this day, hearing the Doom music in any other format doesn't sound right to me because I played so many years of it hearing the game like an ad-lib form, even though ad-lib's not that great. So it's like, honestly, I definitely relate. Yeah, I definitely can relate to that. So
Joe, were you a console only kid or were you a PC kid like myself and Greg?
No, I started with the Atari 2600, then, and I got the 2600, keep in mind, in 86, 87. I didn't get my Nintendo until 91, and then I sold everything to get a Sega Genesis. No, sorry, the Sega Genesis was a gift for Hanukkah. And then I had sold all that to get the Sega Saturn because I thought that was cutting edge and it was going to be super successful.
We all make mistakes.
Yeah, I still love the console, but yeah, I mean, it was not the smartest thing to do, especially when I look back at the games I had and everything else. But
I still contend that's the worst controller, the worst mainstream controller of any game. I hate it.
Really?
I think the Jaguar controllers are probably worse.
Oh wait,
yeah, I was gonna say.
Maybe wait, sorry, I take it back. The Jaguar controller is the worst controller. The Saturn controller is a close runner-up.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, I didn't get my first PC until, fortunately, after my grandfather passed. I had been left some money, and I was able to get an HP. Yeah, it was a Hewlett Packard Bell. At the time, it came with a mammoth 20 gigabyte hard drive.
Wow.
A huge amount of RAM. I want to say it was 256, if not more. It had a CD burner, which was cutting edge at the time. This thing cost me $1,300 in 1998. And, yeah, it was crazy.
20 gigabytes in 1998 was enough to store the planet.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? And you know what I
nowadays,
used it for?
Some 4K movies are bigger than that. So.
Right. So of course, I used it for some gaming and whatnot, but my main purpose for my computer was literally burning PlayStation games and selling them off to my friends in school after I did mod chip modifications to their PlayStation.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So my first computer was actually a Commodore Commodore 64, which is a system you should be familiar with very well, Ollie, because that was the rich kid system over there, from what I understand.
Yeah, we had we never had a 64. We had a VIC 20, which was the one they combined.
Little kid brother.
Yeah, they combined with the Amiga, and then my brother went to college in 1989 and somehow convinced my parents that we needed an Amiga 500, which a microcomputer. Yeah, listen, microcomputer could be how you describe that. Gaming system with a keyboard is how I would describe that.
But so I did not get my first actual IBM clone PC system until about 1988, like whatnot. But I have gamed on PC ever since then, and I've always been equal parts like a console gamer, and a PC gamer, because at the same time the same time I had the Commodore, like I also had an NES. So like to me it's like best of both worlds, because like certain games until recently, we talked about this before, but until recently certain types of games were just better in one format than the other. So
definitely,
it didn't matter what it was, I had it. So that's really that's really only changed in the last generation, I think, where it's like now anything can do anything like very well. So so very different backgrounds. It's always interesting to hear about the kind of stuff. So that's why I wanted to ask you about it.
Well, I was only mentioning the PC, Greg, because you've done PlayStation podcast. You've done This is your SNES podcast, and once you've finished on all of these games, I want you to do a podcast called the PC Gaming Podcast, where you cover every PC game that was ever.
Well, there is a couple podcasts out there already doing that very well. So,
but I just want you to commit to like a 40-year podcasting.
Oh, this is already a 40-year podcast, but I mean, it could be worse. I mean, there's poor Fur doing the Atari 2600 game by game podcast, which is like a bigger library than even this one is. So,
Greg, did your Greg? I meant Joe. Did your Atari 2600? Is that the one with the wood grain finish?
Yeah. Yep.
The station wagon of consoles.
It was one. It's funny because I look back and I laugh at the situation, because I remember it so vividly. I went to my parents and begged for a Nintendo, because I went over to my friend's house, and I'm like 6-7 years old, and I go over to his house and we play Super Mario Brothers, and it blows my mind.
Yeah, of course.
Oh my god, I gotta have this game. So I tell my parents I want a Nintendo and all this other stuff, and I'm like hounding them, and it's like June, July, middle of summer. Like my birthday's already passed. Christmas and Hanukkah are way off. So either way, it ends up that my dad gets a hand-me-down system with about 20 games, and none of them were good games. It's the same crap that you see in game stores now. It's like Asteroids and Centipede, which are all good, but they're so common that everybody's played them. So I can't say I had a fantastic experience with my 2600, but the two takeaways I got was I still to this day will boot up Jungle Hunt and Pitfall. Those are my two favorites on the system.
Jungle Hunt was a great conversion. Playing on a system, excellent job with it.
Yeah, so. But it just kind of fell in my lap because all I wanted was a Nintendo, and thankfully, a couple years from there, I was able to get one. But it was disappointing at the time for sure.
I had, mine was a later generation, like Force Woods Vader version. That's the one I had. But actually, Atari had a manufacturing plant in your area of Ireland for several years there, like in the early 80s. That's where they manufactured all the Ataris for Europe.
Yeah, just outside of Cork, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's where all the Ataris for Europe got.
Yeah, and then
they manufactured that.
And then Texas Instruments took over that factory.
Did they? I did not know that. Okay.
That's where they made all of their calculators for sending out to the nerds in Europe.
Plant must be like closed by now, right? It shut down.
I think the plant itself was shut down, but I think the area might have been redeveloped, and there's definitely a new digital systems or something along those lines. Like, because in that area there's still a lot of technical jobs like that. So
cool.
I can't remember the name of the company that is there now, but it is something like Digital Systems, and they're effectively making like speakers and stuff.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay, cool. All right. Okay. Well, Well, let's talk about this game then, Ollie. What was your introduction to Cannon Fodder, and what do you want to talk about it?
Right, so I was going around to my friend's house, Peter. Lovely guy, had a SNES. Otherwise, probably wouldn't have gone around to his house. Not that lovely of a guy. But we'd go around to his house, and he got this game, Cannon Fodder. And on the front, there was a picture of a poppy, which has like huge significance over in this part of the world. It's how we remember the dead soldiers. So he had like Cannon Fodder, and there's this picture, this beautiful blood red poppy on it, and on the back it's talking about, you know, the violence and how everything is about, you know, the futility of war. And we're looking at going like, use grenades, use rockets, use machine guns to win the war against these insurgents or whatever it was written on the back. We're like, this is cool. And then we sat down to play it, and it's basically a real-time strategy game. And he did not enjoy it. But every time I went round to his house, I wanted to play it. So I'd be going round to Peter's house and saying, "Oh, can I get a squeeze?" You know, after we played a couple of games of football, I think he had FIFA at that stage. Shocking game, but he had it. I'm trying to think what else. We used to do a lot of Mario runs, where one of us would do a level in Super Mario All-Stars, and then the other guy would do a level and see which of us could do it in a faster time. So we used to do stuff like that, and then I would always then say, "Oh, can I get a go at Cannon Fodder?" And there'd be times where he would just like flat out get up and leave the room and go in and watch TV somewhere else, and I'd sit in his bedroom playing Cannon Fodder, because I genuinely loved the game. There's something about it that just speaks to me, like just everything from the art design to the naming the soldiers to the, as you die, their little crosses show up on the loading screens and stuff, and it's just, you know, it's just a fantastic experience, and I'll never forget it. And of all the games that I come back to all the time, like I will play Sensible Soccer because I'm effectively addicted to it, I think. But I will play Cannon Fodder maybe once a year. Just sit down and see if I can get through to level 72. Most times I can't, because it is rock hard. And once you get past level 5 effectively, it's mental difficulty.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting. Because Joe, just confirm you'd not played this game previously before, right? I think
No,
I
I played it for the podcast, and it was my first experience.
Okay. Yeah. So like, you know, I got this game. So I played Cannon Fodder, the DOS port of it, back in the early, back in the mid '90s. I don't remember how I got the game. It might have been illegally obtained, like a lot of my software was like in those days. But
Greg,
statute of limitations is way expired at this point. So it's like, but you know, I was also a teen, so like, you know, not having any kind of disposable money was also a reason for that. So, but anyway, yeah. So so I played quite a bit of Cannon Fodder, and you know, for the most part, I agree with like Ollie. It's a very interesting game. It's a very like unique game. Like in some areas, it starts off pretty easy, and then it doesn't take it very long for it to get like very, very hard. So I don't remember ever beating it back in the day either, for that matter. But So let's go into the let's go into the game background history some a little bit, because there's actually like a lot here to talk about. This is really only to scratch the surface. I mean, like, if you want to go into further depth on this, there's several very good YouTube videos and podcasts already out there talking about the history of Cannon Fodder and Sensible Software, the company that made it. So I definitely recommend that you guys check those out if you're interested. My coverage here is only going to like scratch the surface on this. So, Cannon Fodder was originally designed for the Amiga, which was a great gaming computer, as Ollie already mentioned. 1993, that's when it came out. And then because the game was so popular, it got ported to numerous systems. So eventually over the years, not only did it come out for the Super NES, it also came out for the Amiga CD 3232, the Atari ST, the DOS version I already mentioned, 8-core Archimedes, which is another like British-only system, the 3DO, the Jaguar, the Mega Drive / Genesis, and then eventually in 2000, all you know about this? there was a much changed version of the game released on the Game Boy Color.
Yeah, I've
Really?
seen it, and it looks weird. I don't know how you would control it or play that on that system.
It's interesting. It's interesting. So I played around with it a little bit because I was curious. It's a very different version of the game because they actually made quite a lot of changes the game format, partly to suit the Game Boy Color. But the very fact that the game's even running on the Game Boy Color is nothing short of amazing because, well, for one thing, the game has voices. It has voices all over the place. Like more voices than the original game ever had. So, they also added in like an intro sequence. They also added in cutscenes and different an actual mission briefing, a better mission briefing in the start of the game compared to what you got in the original game and whatnot. It's a very different game altogether. So, and apparently because the game pushes the hardware so much, it actually needs the Game Boy Color to to run the voices and sound effects correctly. If you play the game on anything else, like Game Boy Advance, for example, the voices don't sound correct.
Doesn't sound very advanced to me.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's so in tune to the Game Boy Color software, so it's like, it's interesting. So, So Sensible Software was one of the most famous British computer software companies of the 80s and 90s. They are best well known, as I already mentioned, like the Sensible World of Soccer franchise, which is still going strong today, by the way.
Yeah, you can still. It's such a weird thing that there's a thriving community of people who play Sensible World of Soccer, and there shouldn't be in terms of gameplay and mechanics and everything, it is one of the most simple games that's ever been created. And yet,
my first time playing it,
it's amazing.
Yeah, just to go up the rails real quickly here. My first time playing it was when they came out with the remake version that I bought on the Xbox.
Oh, the 2006
Xbox Live
version.
Yes.
Oh no, sorry.
Yeah.
The remake of Sensible World of Soccer.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the Xbox Live version of that is incredibly difficult.
It's also very fun though. I definitely had a lot of fun with it. So Sensible Software was founded back in 1986. They had a huge list of successes that behind them. They became they became known as one of the premier Amiga developers, as a matter of fact, like the system. Them and probably like Cinematronics, probably they're probably the two companies best known for Amiga games back in those days. And they had most of their games, however, they're best known in Europe. A lot of their games did make it over here to North America. It's just that different companies may have handled the porting or whatnot, and just some of the games just didn't do as just didn't do as well over here because the games do have a very British sense of humor and a personality and gameplay to them. Joe and I have already talked about this before, like a past podcast. It doesn't always translate very well to other countries. So, I think it's probably one reason why the games did not convert as well over here. But eventually the company fell upon hard times, and they were acquired by Codemasters in 1999. And Codemasters themselves was eventually bought up by EA. They're still in operation today as a subsidiary of EA, so they have all the rights to the Sensible Software library.
Codemasters were very big in the late 90s, in the PlayStation 1 era, themselves and Infogrames, and they used to do a lot of racing sims. So they had V-Rally, and they had the Colin McRae Rally games.
Yep.
Things like that.
Yep.
And they were a fantastic company. It used to be a high standard. So Toka World Touring Cars and stuff like that were all Codemaster games, and they're fantastic games.
They also made the Dizzy series. They also made the Operation Flashpoint series. So yeah, many good games.
Yeah, The Dizzy series is Yahtzee from Zero Punctuation's favorite game.
So the game itself was published by Amiga. The game itself came out for the Amiga originally. Virgin Interactive handled the publishing of the game. We're not talking about Virgin Interactive on this podcast either, so I'll spend a minute talking about them. As the full name was Virgin Interactive Entertainment, they were of course part of the mega British company, the Virgin Group. So they were in operation from 1983 and until 2006. They finally closed down. They published numerous games over the years, as well as developing many games themselves. The Command and Conquer series they published, Earthworm Jim they published, many Disney games in Europe were published under their banner. They also had the rights to publish Resident Evil and Street Fighter collection in Europe as well. So Virgin was quite big back in the day. Eventually, however, the branch of the company, were all different fates happened to the company depending upon where you were in the world. The UK branch, for example, was closed down eventually. The American branch was purchased by EA. Nowadays, depending upon what friends are talking about or where in the world you are, certain parts of Virgin Interactive are either owned by EA or Interplay. Interplay also has a bunch of rights to some of their games, and whatnot. So, Virgin did try another entertainment-based company in the 2000s, Virgin Play, 2002 and 2009. But like Disney, they decided that they didn't want to be in the market anymore and eventually closed it. So, which is kind of a strange thing given how big Virgin is, but it is what it is. It's I don't understand Disney closing down their entertainment software branch either. So it's whatever. So
Virgin went through some real changes during the mid 2000s.
True. Yep.
So they used to have, they were called the Virgin Megastore, which was the equivalent of HMV, which also means nothing to Americans. So Virgin Megastores, HMV, were huge media places. So you could go in and buy CDs. You could buy magazines if you wanted to. I mean, who was really big? But you could buy CDs, you could buy records, you could buy video games, and there were just like very large versions of Tower Records, for example, right? And they had everything. And then the Virgin Megastore started to close down, and I think it was just a downsizing of the company or a refocus away from that. They had their own music division and they stopped producing music as well. It was just this weird thing where they decided that they were not going to make disposable software things anymore for some reason.
Right, yeah.
Strange, because Virgin Megastore there was a huge one in Dublin that was just fantastic. It was you'd get it. So I live in the country in Ireland, so going to Dublin is like going to the big city, despite the fact it's only a city with 1 million people. It's not massive, right? But coming from a town with 1,000 people, it was pretty big. So we'd get down there, and the first thing any of myself or my brothers would want to do is, oh, can we go to the Virgin Megastore? And then it was we might as well have been the kid from Big in FAO Schwartz running around looking at all of the toys. That's what we were, running around Virgin Megastore looking at all of the games and looking at all of the CDs from I just remember them having the largest warehouse of CDs on the rack that you could buy. If I went to the local equivalent shop close to me in County Monaghan where I grew up, there might be 200 CDs to buy, and you're stepping into a room where suddenly there were 5,000 CDs all lined up around. It was just mind-blowingly large, and then just overnight gone.
Yeah, Virgin's always been more of a presence in Europe than North America. It's I know Virgin these days mostly because of the airline.
Yeah.
Virgin Atlantic. Also a hotel chain. They still operate. They still operate a chain of hotels. But I know in Europe, for example, there's still books and music and railroads and that kind of stuff that they're part of as well. Also, but the company's still doing well, but they definitely have gone through a downsize. So, But anyway, yeah. So yeah, many games I loved, many games I bought as a kid at the computer. They were published by Virgin, so I definitely have like fond memories of them.
Joe, when you're listening to Greg going through the history of stuff like this, because I always find it fully interesting, but the stuff like that stand out. Do you remember like back in the 90s? Because we're roughly the same age. So when you were 16 and 17 and playing video games, would it have registered with you that something was from Codemasters or something was from Gremlin Interactive, for example? Or would that have just washed over you? Because realistically, I think most of that would have washed over me as a kid.
Yeah, that would have washed over me. The only thing I remember is I had Micro Machines and I had Quattro Sports, which were both gold carts. I had to flip a dongle switch on the back to be able to play it on the Nintendo, and those prominently showed the Codemasters logo. So to me, the gold carts, other than obviously Zelda, which I knew better, were basically made by Codemasters, and they stuck out in my collection. But outside of that, no. Like I probably didn't learn that Konami had the rights to Castlevania until well into the late 90s, early 2000s. Like that's when I started realizing that, you know, all these different companies, whatever, like to me it was like, oh, it's Nintendo. It's Nintendo.
Yeah,
yeah, that's interesting to say that. Oh, sorry, Joe. I'm sorry. Like, yeah, sorry. Let me say this. If anyone like, go ahead. Yeah, I guess like maybe I just always like pay more attention to that stuff anyway for some reason, because it's like I remember as a kid, even like being like, you know, like maybe like when I had my Atari 2600, I was maybe like, you know, like 6-7 years. Even then, as a kid, I noticed how much better my Activision games were than the rest of the stuff I had. It was like, you know,
yeah.
As even at that early age, I associated, Activision games are better for some reason. So even I guess because that experience, I started paying more attention to companies, because it's like during the NES days, like in the 80s, it's like Capcom and Konami were the gold standard for NES games for a long time. You know, like not just NES games, Super NES games as well. It's like, you know, and so in those days, you only really had you really only had like word of mouth or magazine reviews to go off on for a game. It was like good or not, and remember, these games were expensive, and you're probably only going to get like, you know, like 1 or 2 of them a year or whatever. Right. So, but you know, you could walk into a store, pick up like the trademark, like, you know, like gray box with Konami on Konami in the front, or like either you know, like a trademark like red and blue Capcom box, not knowing anything about the game itself, but no, because Konami or Capcom had made it like it was gonna be a good game, and, you know, like buy and take it home and be happy with it. And yeah, the track record of those companies those days was excellent. There really was not, to this day I would defend, there was not a bad Konami or Capcom game like the NES. You know, and that continued, and the Super NES also continued that legacy as well. So it's like, you know, I've always been acutely aware of the fact, like, you know, which company's actually developing. Now, mind you, in those days, I didn't realize that sometimes the games are being developed by other companies, because that information was not really publicly available or shared like it is nowadays.
Oh, so you wouldn't have made a distinction between Konami as a publisher and Konami as a developer. You just go,
exactly,
it's a Konami
right.
Game,
I just thought
it's a Konami game.
Exactly, right. So which to be fair, Konami Capcom did develop most of the games themselves, but not always. But, you know, compared to other companies, like Acclaim was notorious for this. Acclaim would often just shovelware their games out to like these cheap ass developers in Japan or whatever, but they wouldn't be mentioned anywhere on it. Like, you know, like for example, like Atlas made numerous NES games. Nobody knew that because they're getting because their name never got any press. So it's like, but yeah. So like, you know, you know, and going back to Virgin again, it's like, you know, yeah, they were just a publisher, but I realized even back then that they had very good taste in the games they published, because it's like, you know, like I mentioned some of their games, like, you know, like Command and Conquer, like Command and Conquer, like in the other series, the other series that they published. So it's like, and Nintendo also, I was also acutely aware of which games Nintendo, because Nintendo actually hit you over the head with that. Which games are actually like theirs.
You got that seal of approval, Greg.
Yeah. So it's like, I know the kids also paid a lot of attention to Konami and Capcom in the day, but I guess I've always been like more acutely aware of it because of my experiences with Activision, like way back when as a kid. So it's like, I guess I always had like paid more attention, like that kind of stuff that other people have, because and I already did up until the PlayStation days. I knew when the home system started to break down. So, but anyway, I did not mean to cut you off.
Oh no, it didn't. I was just going to say I find now that it's become almost commonplace for people to talk about this kind of stuff. Like, just for example, I interact with a lot of kids who are 16, 17, 18, 19, right? And I'll be talking to them about video games because I still game. I'm not really as big into the more popular modern stuff, but I'll still be able to hold a conversation with them. And I've heard kids talk about, for example, like take a Souls game, and they're talking about Elden Ring coming out, and they're like, oh yeah, but she can trust From Software, right?
Yeah.
There is no way that 18-year-old Ollie Brady was wandering around saying, don't worry about it, you can trust this software developer. And I was gaming way more than I was back then. So at this point now, I've even heard kids talking about the people who are creating the games. Like, oh, the lead developer on this game is the guy who did God of War on the PlayStation 4. The redone God of War. And I've heard kids saying that. I'm sitting there going, that's like knowing the second unit director on Sleepy Hollow, the Tim Burton movie. You know what I mean? Like, right. Why would any kid at 17 or 18 actively need to know that? But because they're on Reddit all the time, sorry, not necessarily Reddit. I don't want to sound like I'm talking crap about Reddit. I don't want them to come after me. But because kids are online a lot, that's the discourse that is so much more common than it was back when we were kids, because we weren't living in that world. You just might recognize the front of a box saying from the makers of, right? Whereas, as I said, nowadays we have movie, like, we all know who directs every single movie. Like, as soon as it comes up, like, I automatically go, oh, this is a Judd Apatow connected movie, so you know what that means, right? And it seems to be that's the way they're going with video games. Like, Naughty Dog, it's just such a highly recommended developer that kids know that it's a new Naughty Dog movie or a game that's coming out.
Sure.
Whereas I don't think it was that way in like 1996. Beyond, as I said, the Nintendo seal of approval, we all knew that little gold seal meant that it was going to be a good game, unless it was Star Fox.
Potentially.
Well, they certainly tried. I mean, Activision and EA, like in the '80s, did start giving out credit to programmers, in their, like the manuals, the manuals, the press releases, like whatnot. Like they tried. I don't know. I agree with you. I don't think many people like really they really latched onto that. But it's like the first person the first two big names I remember associated with gaming would be like Miyamoto, because I was working Nintendo. Like you knew like as a kid, as a teenager in the 90s and in the 90s I was like, oh, like Miyamoto worked on this, so it must be like a good game. But because He was that good. And then, in the PlayStation era, Kojima also took off huge, because everybody knew that Kojima was the mastermind so was the guy behind Metal Gear Solid. Never mind the fact he already had made the first two Metal Gear games and a bunch of other games besides that. It was because of the hype of that series that his name became so well known. So it's the trend's older than people might realize, but it definitely has accelerated in more recent years. It is very curious to I'm curious to hear how widespread that that is.
I think the first name, if you were to try to pin me down and say, name one developer or designer of video games that jumps out to you. I know John O'Hare from the Sensible Games, but that's just because I love the Sensible Games. I don't think I would have known his name back in the 90s. But if you were to ask me to name one guy, I think it might be Peter Molyneux.
Yeah.
Which, and he was fantastic, but also a blatant liar. So,
Right.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he is complicated for sure, but but definitely talented. So, but yeah. So I mean, it's I mean, Sensible Software was more like of a British company. Company. Did you realize back then Cannon Fodder was made by them? I mean,
yeah.
To show such a love
As a lover of sensible
Sensible
soccer,
yeah,
100%. So back in those days, you would only get 1 or 2 games a year, maybe. There was definitely years, the lean years, I like to call them, in the mid 90s, where you'd only get 1 game for a console in a year, right?
Oh yeah.
PC, it was great because, as Greg said, you could always find them if you knew what you were doing. And your it was really easy to take the right protection off a floppy disk and make a copy of it. These things were easily done. But for something like an SNES or a Mega Drive, it was, those games were expensive in Europe. I'm not sure what they were in the States, but I remember seeing specifically A Link to the Past for £64 in 1994, 1995. Is that the year it came out? So £64, which would, so first of all, it's pounds, so it needs to be converted into dollars. So that's around about $100 back then. And then add on the fact that we've had 25 years of inflation.
Yeah.
It's $120 for just the bare copy of the game. So therefore you were lucky to get 1 to 2 games a year. So for something, knowing that this was a Sensible Soccer game, or from the same company who made Sensible Soccer and made Whizball and had made Micropro Soccer back in the early 90s, I really wanted to play it, which is why when my friend got it, I was like, okay, I'm all over this. And constantly going around. And I said, they're just fantastic. Playing it now again on the NES, the SNES, it's not exactly an enjoyable experience because it's a game that really needs a mouse. And Joe hopefully will be able to tell us, he's coming to it new and he doesn't have the love for it that I have. I persevered. I finished it this week, by the way.
Awesome.
And I really,
cool.
I mean, I may have gone and watched a YouTube video to figure out how to get through level 64 because that is difficult. But I did manage to get to the end of it, and I maybe only did that on the Amiga on the PC version, the DOS version back in maybe 97, 98. But I persevered through and I finished it. But it wasn't an enjoyable experience because of the controls, but the game itself, the actual core gameplay, it's fantastic. It's genuinely an enjoyable game to play.
Yeah. So, this is gonna happen to 3 of us on here. Sorry about this. Joe, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna mention that, absolutely. I played it on the Super Nintendo for the first time. This was my first experience. I didn't hate the game. I went in thinking that I was going to not enjoy this game just by the little bit that I saw on
because you're not
YouTube.
really an RTS fan, though, are you?
Right. And I was just like, okay, I see it. Greg is once again, giving me a slow plotting game that I got to go through. And I was like, it is whatever, But I enjoyed it for what it was. I didn't get far. I think I got to mission 4 before I threw up my hands. But
that's still good, Joe. Trust me.
Yeah, I mean, with the speech that they had in the game, the ambiance. The only thing I didn't like about this game, in all honesty, is the fact that there was no music while you played. They had
Yeah,
some
that
great
is a
tracks in the
drawback.
beginning.
Yeah.
They had some great tracks like on the mission briefing, but like nothing in between. All it is ambiance, which is fine because, it helps you find your enemy and you get to hear the guns gun them down and they go, "Ugh," and everything else. And, and this game for a Super Nintendo game especially is pretty brutal. I was
it's
shocked
very
to see
brutal.
people getting people getting torn apart and everything else. That really surprised me.
Yeah.
But I mean, the game was good enough to where I installed an Amiga emulator. I got the game for the Amiga and I sat down and I played it on the Amiga. I got a lot further. I think to like round 11 or 12, so about twice as far as I got on the Super Nintendo.
You're way into the difficult missions there, Joe. Like at that point, like even back when I was playing this a lot in the mid 90s, you'd be losing tons of guys by the time you get up to there. Like actually, screen over, like game over. Screen over. It's like I've never played a game before. Like a game over screens popping up and stuff. So like to get that far is impressive.
Yeah, and you know what? Like, this is the first game that, like, I really played, as far as, like, a real-time strategy, where, like, when one of my guys died, like, I felt that. Like, it was, like, in my chest. Like, I was like, oh, man, like, that dude just went through, X amount of missions. Like, he just pulled all this stuff. He ranked up, which, that's another thing. This rank up system, I don't even think that did anything. Like, I thought, like, my guy was getting stronger, so I was like, cool, he's getting ranked up. Maybe he can be more of a bullet sponge. No, he's still going to die. So, I didn't understand the point of them including that aspect into the game. But, yeah, I actually enjoyed this more than I thought I would.
It makes you...
I know.
I love
That's exactly what it is.
Corporal Jops. Brigadier General Jules.
And I agree with you. The names are fantastic.
Yeah. Plus the game name itself is plus the game name itself is very on point because Super Your guys literally are Ken fodder. So,
right.
But especially like some of those missions. So I may be able to speak more about this because I'd never had an Amiga as a kid, but my thoughts as to why the game doesn't have any music during the actual gameplay is because of the fact that its origins are on the Amiga, and therefore the game originally shipped out on discs. So trying to load and play all stuff on the fly in those days was not easy. So once CD games came out, they could play music tracks much easier during gameplay because streaming the music directly off the CD. But in those days, it had to load everything. Space was precious. Memory was limited, and just but speaking about the music, there actually is a song at the start of the game, the opening of the game. Super NES version, for some reason, does not contain the lyrics of the song, which most of the versions do. Because all I can speak about this as well. The original Amiga version and most of the Atari ST version has it. The Jaguar 3DO versions all have it. There's actually a song sung at the start of the game, like War's Never Been So Much Fun, which is actually a very catchy tune.
Yeah. The music even in this version, it's a bastardized version, is the only way to describe it, of the original tunes. It's actually a kind of a cracking soundtrack. Like, it's not something where you're going to sit there. It's not like Final Fantasy VII soundtrack where you're going to throw it on and be like, oh, it just reminds me of Marsh, But like, you're going to sit there and play, that immediately brings me back to Cannon Fodder. I know that this here is the intro to the jungle levels in Cannon Fodder, right? And it's fantastic, but the reason it's not, as you said, they couldn't really load it straight from the disc. 144 or 1.44 megabytes, or whatever the discs had at the time, right? So they couldn't really load it to play from the disc or whatever. But they also are a lot of ambient sounds. So on the Amiga version, if you're walking in the snow, you will get like a little crunch of the steps, which we're not getting on the SNES version. But again, there was limitations to the system. It still sounds good, I suppose. It's just you might want to have a little bit of music. It might also be for the fact that you need to be able to hear the guys off screen, or else the game would, like, at the more difficult levels, it would become almost impossible.
True, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because the game doesn't have a radar, so you really have no idea unless you played it before, like where the enemy guys are coming from. So, yeah, those sound cues are very important, especially later on in the game. Just to go off track a little bit here, I actually was not aware about this. There were sequels to this game because the game was so popular. Cannon Fodder 2 and Cannon Fodder 3.
yeah, also good games. Really enjoyable.
Oh, yep. I was gonna ask you, but I've never played them. So, So is Cannon Fodder still your favorite of the series then?
I personally, I think Cannon Fodder 2 is a better game.
Okay.
But it's more of the same.
Yeah.
I just think that the levels are a little bit more interesting in Cannon Fodder 2. Cannon Fodder 3 feels like hey, listen, we had some other ideas for levels, let's throw it out. And it not bad, it's still fun, it's still, a good game. But yeah, I personally prefer Cannon Fodder 2, but that also might just be because that's the game of the series that I put the most amount of time into. So
okay,
you have that in the back of your mind, like, that's the best of them. But it might not actually be the best of them. I just happen to enjoy it more. I was just thinking, the guy, John O'Hare, the lead developer, is the guy who wrote the music. And he also did the music for Sensible World of Soccer, which I'm going to play on my phone because it's on my phone.
Sensible World of Soccer. That's that's some good music. That song's very good.
I'm just gonna stop. It's just the idea that somebody would write, "But guys, we need a song for the intro. How about you're a goal-scoring superstar hero? You're going to get ahead in the game." Like, come on.
To hear the actual lyrics of the song and the original Amiga version of the game was like, oh, this is interesting. But the Super NES version has the song, it's recognizable as always said, but even though Super NES could handle voice, they decided to leave the lyrics out. So, but to be fair, the Mega Drive version didn't have it either. The DOS version didn't have it either. But so the Super NES port of the game is interesting because maybe you can shed a bit of light on this, Ollie, because one of the problems I have occasionally in doing research like podcasts, that older video games are not documented then as they are now. So trying to find information on why certain things happened can be very complicated and difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
So the Super NES version of the game only came out in Europe. There's only like a PAL version of the game, which apparently did not sell very well or was not a very big run because I will get into eBay pricing at the end, but there's not many copies of the game available on eBay. They are very expensive. So the game only got a PAL release in Super NES. There is evidence to suggest that there was evidence to suggest that an NTSC port was in the works. Because there is, for example, a listing of passwords. The game uses a password system to advance your progress. In the console version, whereas the original computer version had a save disk function instead. But the passwords are different for the PAL version as compared to the NTSC version, which suggests there was an NTSC version being planned or worked on.
The password system was, if I remember correctly, because the password system for Sensible games was crazy. Like the one for Sensible Soccer was a circular disc that you had to put together football kits, and then it gave you a code from it. And this was the one for Cannon Fodder was like I put this sheet over page 55 or 22 of the manual, and what word is revealed in box number 6. Yeah. So like you had to have the manual and the sheet to be able to get into the game.
I do not miss those days. Not one bit. But anyway, So anyway, I can't say for sure. The best evidence I can find online suggests that the game was planned and possibly developed for the NTSC markets, but never came out. It's possible a prototype is sitting somewhere in storage somewhere that somebody's sitting on, either because either because they're afraid to release it, or because they don't want to. You know, there are certain rare prototypes that collectors sit on for whatever reason, if we don't want to share it for reasons, whatever. So, So, I'm not surprised the game did. I'm not surprised the game did not get a North American release, because most versions of the game did get released in North America. Because like, I think the Genesis version did come out here in the States. I'm not sure about that one either, but the Atari version definitely did. The DOS version definitely did. The game did. The game definitely did come over here in the States. It didn't do as well in the States as it did in Europe, of course, but
it's very British, as you said. Like, it's
yes,
like the whole sensibility, and I suppose the sensibility, pun intended. But the whole look of the game, the whole cannon fodder aspect of it, like, hey, get in here. You guys are literally just going to get wiped out. You're now heroes of the war. Even if a guy dies without doing anything, he gets onto the list of heroes. You know, stuff like this.
Oh,
here.
yeah, definitely.
Like, it's all very, very. It's very Blackadder humor. And
yes.
So maybe they were worried that wouldn't translate into the SNES market in the States, because, as we know, SNES fans are giant children. They don't get satire, but so I can see why they didn't release it. It's just a shame, because to me it's a fantastic game. The controls are an issue a little bit, because you're going from a mouse where you can scroll over and highlight stuff to using the controller where you have to hit two buttons at the same time to launch a grenade, and sometimes it doesn't work properly. But yeah, it would have been good. I think Americans would have enjoyed it.
Well, the original release of the game actually had a whole bunch of controversy attached to it as well, which I probably can speak about better than I can. But
what happened was, I'm trying to think what the best American equivalent would be. So let's just say the National Enquirer, right? So the newspaper equivalent of the National Enquirer found out the game was called Cannon Fodder, saw the front cover, had a picture of the poppy, and the poppy is very important in the UK, right? Mm-hmm. It is their Memorial Day celebration, effectively. Is people wear poppies to remember those who died in the wars. And the idea that this newspaper took it upon themselves to suddenly decide that they were mocking soldiers. That's not what the game is about at all. They were glorifying war. Again, that's not what the game is about at all. But this was published, and they went around and told leaders of the like Veterans Association leaders, that's what this game was doing. Oh, it's glorifying war. It's making joke out of what happened to you guys over there in World War II or World War I, whatever it happens to be. And this led to a lot of outrage beforehand, but that's not 100%. That's not what the game is.
Yeah.
So yeah, it had some protests when it was being released. They tried to make them take the poppy off the cover. They weren't helped by certain magazines sticking up for the game, but doing so in there's no way your publicist thought this true when they said what you said, which was like, oh, old soldiers are angry at the game. I wish they were all dead. That was a quote I think I remember from the head of PlayStation Power. It became PlayStation Power magazine. It was called Amiga Power magazine. That was what the editor wrote as his response to the controversy. You're like, come on, dude, get over it. You could.
I believe the actual line was "Old soldiers, I wish them all dead."
Yeah, there you go. I knew it was something along those lines,
which did not help one bit.
Yeah, so. No, that's not going to make it. And they were trying to argue a poppy is just a flower. And the thing about it is, Sensible Software never once were making those arguments. This was journalists taking it upon themselves to make the arguments for Sensible Soccer. John O'Hare, his granddad had fought in World War II. He wasn't himself going to go, the poppy doesn't mean anything, because the poppy does mean something. That's why they chose it.
Yeah.
Because it's specific.
Yeah, the game's actually right. Yeah. Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, because like the developers. Yeah, because the developers are on record as saying this game was designed to be an anti-war game, which it really is. It's it's very fun, it's very comical, but at its core, they're trying to say look, war actually is terrible. We're against it. We're just trying to make the game, we're trying to make it a little bit more friendly, Mass Effect. So I think some of that may have thrown up. So I think some of that may have gone over people's heads too as well. So, but speaking about the cover, so the information I have here indicates that they did actually yank the original cover image, because all the pictures I found of the cover online do not have the poppy on the cover. It just simply shows like a beige color. So if there were a version of the game released with the poppy still on the box, I could not find them. My understanding was that it never came out that way.
Oh, the poppy definitely came out on the box.
Okay.
I've seen it. I've owned it.
I've never seen any pictures of it online. I looked. I could not find any.
But maybe not on the SNES.
Well, the Amiga version, like if you go to Wikipedia, for example, right there's a picture of the Amiga version of the game.
It's got a little soldier.
Like no poppy. Yeah.
And stuff like that, right? But the original, the original versions with the poppy definitely were in stores. And I think I can't remember. I don't even remember if it was even a second run of the game. But it was definitely released with the poppy on the cover.
Yeah, there must have been. But yeah, actually, let me share this picture with you real quick here, because the poppy they did use very heavily in the title screen. On the game itself, that's still there.
Oh yeah, sorry. The title screen, it was definitely still there. There were versions of the game had it on the cover as well. But that's the way more common version of it you'll see. Yeah, which is just the green, which is meant to be camouflage, I'm assuming.
Exactly right. Yeah. So, So as mentioned before, this is a real-time. It's been mentioned before. This is a real-time strategy game, in which there is it's action, but there is also less strategy involved with it. I actually was reminded quite a bit about, I played this first, so I didn't make the connection with this as a kid, but now playing this again, I'm like, this actually reminds me a lot of Command and Conquer, how it plays, because it's there's no vehicles, there's no bases, but the actual gameplay itself feels very CNC to me. Because there are missions in CNC where you're just basically doing this, where you're just taking these squad soldiers moving around a map, you're trying to kill everybody. So, there's a total of, how many missions altogether are there? Oh, 72. Yeah, 72 levels through 23 missions. As I mentioned before, they do get very, very difficult shortly end. So, your squad eventually increases in size to 5 soldiers. You have the ability to shoot the guns. You also have grenades. You also can pick up rockets later on. Supply crates are an important risk and reward, because sometimes you have to be careful using them or not, because they explode, they can damage you, or that would kill some of your soldiers.
Yeah, and some of the later levels, they're positioned specifically to make you think, oh, there's where I'm going to get my grenades, and it's just for it. It's not like the enemy are laying a trap. The game has put them there specifically because if you don't clear out the enemy on that screen, a stray bullet will blow those up before you get to them, and so it becomes tactical to get them in. When you were saying it's like Command and Conquer, it's like Command and Conquer if there's only one unit.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, but later on in the game, you also have to face against things like jeeps and tanks and helicopters and whatnot, which makes the game much more difficult. Because and you will like the name implies, you will go through cannon fodder in this game, because the opening screen about the line of guys going over the hills to the gates,
wearing their regular clothing. Yeah.
Because because the road drives up the point. Oh yeah, these are just fodder for us to use, and who cares? You lost 5 soldiers on that mission. Here's 5 more saps won't take their place. So it's the message behind that is so deep when you think about it.
There are hidden mechanics in the game that you don't even realize until you've played it a lot. So when you were playing, you would have noticed more guys lining up. So at the start of each mission, there'd be more guys coming over the hill to increase the length of your line. That's the number of new guys who show up is controlled by your ratio on top of the screen. So it says you versus them, and then they have a score, like it's a score system in the war, effectively, right? If you are losing quite a lot of guys, you get less new members showing up. Because the idea is that if you are doing gloriously well in the war and killing hundreds of the enemy, idiots are lining up to join as a soldier. So they're running up over the hill, and it's a very simple yet very clever mechanic to show, hey, we're doing great. There's 20 new guys have showed up outside the base trying to join the army, but if you're doing poorly, there's only 3 or 4 show up outside, because who wants to go to a war that's a war of attrition where people are dying?
Right, exactly. Exactly. The developers definitely knew what they were doing, like making the game. Because there's themes on top of themes on top of themes, but you may not actually realize all that stuff until you've actually played it for hours and hours and hours. Or heard something explain it to you. It's it really is the game really does the game really does try to prevent a very strong anti-war message. Message to you.
The end screen, the finishing screen, I think is the most poignant thing, because once you finish the game, it tells you you won, and then it gives you a list of all of the soldiers that have died, and it runs through with their stats, and then the finishing screen again is you win the game effectively, with your score versus their score on the top of the screen. But on the hills, it's just littered with the crosses of all of your soldiers who've died. So you have a screen which is you've won the game, but you have all of the dead people who, effectively were fighting the war for you, a general, sending them out to do stuff. They're the ones who are dead, but hey, you won the game. As a finishing image, as an ending image, and having to look at the names of all of your characters that have gone through and died, it's very effective at, hey, war is not for fun.
And even though I think the British humor doesn't always translate very well to the States, I did think this game was still I think most of it worked pretty well for this game. I did think this game was very funny. There are points definitely where there are points where I laughed out loud at it. So, Joe, do you have any experiences of the humor in the game or some of the over the top effects of the game that have been impressive on you?
Like I said earlier, I was kind of shocked to see people getting blown apart and whatever else, which obviously was programmed there, specifically for this. But I love British humor, so I picked up on little things here and there that I enjoyed. Like I said, this game was enjoyable because of everything surrounding the mechanic, which is why I was like, oh, I need to get an Amiga emulator and play this on the Amiga proper, because if I'm enjoying this cut down essentially version that's being hindered by a controller, it's got to be better with a mouse and keyboard.
True. The names of the game, as I already mentioned, the names of the game are great. The names of their soldiers is that's it's also a very tongue-in-cheek reference on some of them. So let's talk about the port itself. Always has the most experience, I think, with maybe the original computer versions, but I don't know. I think it's a pretty good port. There are the usual, the Super NES was not as powerful. The Super NES was not as powerful as the Amiga, so there are, of course, concessions that had to be made. The graphics definitely don't look as good on the Super NES. I mean, they're still good graphics, but the graphics, but compared to the Amiga version, you're no contest. The music the music sounds good, but again, it's not as good as the original tunes on the original tunes, like the Amiga version of it. But the the sound effects also like as well. Of course, you have the whole like controller versus like mouse and keyboard issue. But all in all, those downsides of it, taken into account, the game's a very good port, I think, on the Super NES, and most of the consoles had very good ports to the game. I don't think any of the, I don't think any of the ports of any ports of the game came out terribly. Maybe the Super NES version of the game kind of compares some of the weakest compared to some of them. But then again, Super NES was not as powerful as, like I said, the Jaguar or the 3DO as far as what they could do. But it's not watered down too much in any meaningful way. Minus the whole control scheme, which is the control scheme, which is a whole different can of worms. But so Ollie, what do you think about the conversion of the game? The conversion of the game itself, like on the Super NES.
Yeah, I think if you didn't know that this was an Amiga game, and you came to it completely in a vacuum and had never seen it, I think you wouldn't not. Do you understand? Like, you wouldn't not think it was developed for the console. I think it looks and plays like an SNES game. It's got its own graphical style, which works really well. I was actually going to just say something. You just mentioned about the graphics not too bad. They're not quite as good as the Amiga version.
Of course, yeah.
But I was thinking about this the other day. So I was playing The Last of Us 2, right? Which is a fantastic game, right? And I really enjoy it. I have issues with the story, and I'm sure loads of, there are well-documented issues with the story, right? But as a game, it's great. It's one of the most graphically amazing things you're ever going to see. And I still don't think it's as effective. Anything in that game is as effective graphically as the guys getting injured and crying out to be killed as they are in Cannon Fodder. And it's a sprite with 10 pixels. Right. And the sound is just the guys screaming. And again, I'm thinking about how I was playing The Last of Us 2, and it looks like I'm in a real forest, and I can hear the axe hitting the guy's head with the meaty sound, and his friends coming looking for him. And I still don't think any of that affected me as much as last week when I was playing through Cannon Fodder going, I'm going to have to put that guy down because I don't want to have to hear his screams. Like, also for anybody listening, it's not that deep of a game. It's not like Silence of the Lambs territory here, but it is like there are as Joe had mentioned, there are some brutal parts to it, and I think the graphics work really, really well at getting across information without detail. So
sure.
Whoever designed this, whoever was the art director for the video game, has done a fantastic job of getting everything across. Considering that they don't have that many colors to work with, they don't have that many textures to work with, and yet still the jungle levels don't just look like the snow levels with white over the top, which is something which can happen in SNES and Genesis era games.
Exactly right. Yeah. So I don't know who handled the conversion of the games for the games. Sensible Software and Version did handle the conversions of the game. I don't know who in Sensible Software worked the Super NES port. But the original artist for the Amiga version was Stu Cambridge, who's a very well-known British artist.
Yeah.
So, for sure. So the biggest issue I had with this version of the game, and Joe, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this. Ollie's not going to notice this because he's used to it, but because this game was PAL, I found it to be very, very slow and sluggish, to the point where I actually had to increase the speed rate, like an emulator, to play it more like an NTSC version to what I'm used to, because I found...
You bloody purists.
Yeah, because the game was just so slow. I'm like, speed up already. But, did you have that frustration, Joe?
So, having not played this game before, no, I didn't have any of that. So, I didn't even think of the fact that, oh my god, its PAL is running at 50 hertz or whatever. That didn't even seep into my mind. So I played it like I thought it was intended to be, which is slow and prodding, and like the slowness of the game I thought was a programming aspect of it. Like that is how it's supposed to be. That's how the game is played.
Huh.
And
Okay.
I didn't notice the difference until, like I said, I played the Amiga version and it moved much better. But I mean, it is what it is. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
If
I mean, like, you know,
if I had probably gotten this, you know, or, you know, was more educated going into it, I think I probably would have noticed the difference, maybe, but probably not.
Well, I'm sure the game. Yeah, of course, because like, you know, like. Yeah, because that makes sense. Because like, you know, like you wouldn't know unless you actually pay attention to it that, you know, there's a PAL game. Because like, you know, like I said, if the game had come out in North America, of course they would have, like, you know, changed it. So
Right.
we wouldn't have noticed anything like over here. But it's like, it's like, you know, I didn't even have to compare it to the original game. I'm just like, you know, this just. Like I knew right away. Oh, this is a PAL game. It's gonna be slow. So like played. I'm like, oh yeah, it's slow. So I actually bumped up the frame rate to 100%, like in the emulator, to speed up to approximate what it would have been in the original PAL format.
Right.
So, because as all I can testify to, the game is supposed to be like fast paced, but
Yeah, it's supposed to be
missions.
smooth, not
Yeah.
necessarily fast paced, but like each of your little so for those, you might as well explain the game to the people. You're pointing. I keep talking about the mouse. So you select where you want your soldiers to move with the arrow, which is on screen. You hit A, they'll move to there. If you hit B, they'll fire in the direction where your arrow is. That's effectively the entire controls of the game. And you have to move around and you reveal the giant map as you go along, and you just move through each of the 9 effective screens of the map. It's a continuous scrolling screen, but if you were to start on the top right, you would have 3 full screens before you got to the top left. All right, so you basically just go through the 9 squares of the map and kill everything that moves.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's the game. It just becomes difficult as you go along. I agree with what Joe was saying, that it does run much smoother on the Amiga. But if you had never played it, it feels like the pace on the SNES is intentional. So as in,
Okay, yeah.
so this is not a faster action game, right? And even though it's, I do prefer the Amiga version. I like the slightly slower pace of the SNES version.
Really? Okay.
It's
Interesting.
just because I like then feeling like I'm kind of gonna sound like a psychopath here. I like methodically making my way through the map and murdering everything, which is what you're doing. Whereas sometimes in the Amiga version, especially in the early levels, it's almost like a sprint. Like you can imagine the guys are knackered by the time they've finished getting around and killing all of those unsuspecting, you know, soldiers coming out of their endless huts.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the map. Do you wish the game ever had a radar system, Ollie? Do you think that, I think the radar would have really made this game a lot easier, but it would, but having said that, I also recognize that it would really change the gameplay quite a bit.
Yeah, if it would make anything after level 50 pointless, because once you get up to those levels, it's all about taking your time and what's off screen. And as I was talking about, listening to the audio cues, because the sound a rocket guy makes is different to the sound a grenade guy makes, which is different to the sound of a helicopter. You can hear a helicopter from effectively 2 screens over. So if you had radar from the beginning, I think you would still have to reveal each of the screens. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Sure, exactly, yeah.
So effectively, if you're going to have to do that, then there's no benefit to having it in. It would make the game easier, but they would.
Well, they might have used I was gonna say they might have used the command and conquer system with radar, which so the way it works there is the radar only shows areas that you've actually explored. The rest of the map is still black.
Yeah.
So it would help you with the areas that you've already been to, but not the new areas.
But see, this is what I'm saying is so yes, you would have to go and explore them, but then I think the game would become, because it's slightly faster, I think it would become me running into the screen on the right and then running back out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I reveal that part of the map. I come back out. Okay. So this is what was real on the map. Oh, I can see there's 4 guys in there now. So
Yeah.
And you guys probably didn't do this a lot in the lower levels, but you can split your party and get them to come in 4 different places. So I said it gets quite tactical, and you can give them individual instructions as to what you want them to do. So in that way, I was just thinking like I could go in and lure the guys to follow me out of the screen and have my other 3 guys set up to do suppressing fire effectively.
Right.
And then it would just become, what did they call it in Dark Souls, Greg? Kiting? Where
Yes.
you go grab, like run into the room, wait for the skeletons to follow you and run out of the room, and then take them in a narrow corridor where they can't surround you. So that's
Right,
what
exactly,
effectively
yeah,
you'd
yeah.
be doing. You should be kiting soldiers around just for your guys to mow them down.
Which you have to do in most missions because, like, you know, you are outnumbered and outgunned for most of the game. So if you don't do that, you're gonna get squattered, like 5 seconds flat.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of strategy in this game. I mean, it's a very deeper game than it first looks.
Yeah, it starts out very simple, gets very, very difficult.
But yeah, cool. Okay. So Joe, you said that over all in all, you had a pretty positive experience with this, even though you're not a big RTS fan.
Yeah.
Is this the game you think you may go back to at some point, maybe on the Amiga?
Yeah, I would be more than happy to go back to this. Actually, I just was looking up on Google. Apparently, Cannon Fodder 3 is available on Steam. So
I did not know that, huh? Okay.
Yeah,
all
so
right.
I might have to look to see what other games might be available.
Right.
I know there is a version of Cannon Fodder 3 where they 3D'd it up a little bit. So
Yeah. The screenshots I saw, it looked like it was still like like a top-down kind of isometric view.
good. Go for it,
but
Joe.
with
You will not.
you know,
You will not regret it. It's good fun.
Did you ever play this game? Also reminds me a lot about so this game also reminds me a lot about another like British computer game like the time period. So did you ever play like Syndicate?
Oh yeah, Syndicate's a great game.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this is very similar. Like Syndicate is
I was gonna say very similar.
Slightly
Yeah,
more.
right.
I was gonna say slightly more arcadey version of this, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
a less thinking man's version of this, I would say.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. Yeah, Syndicate's also a great game. So, this. So you already mentioned, this was your first time really playing the Super NES. The Super NES, like you're pleasantly surprised by it. What were your, what were the drawbacks or some limitations on this version, not counting the control scheme, which you've already talked about? So, all in all, was there anything else about this version of the game that you really liked or disliked?
Yeah, I think because I had never played it before in Amiga, I knew about it. I knew about Sensible's games. I didn't really have any drawbacks beyond the fact that it was existing in another person's house. So I had to go around and be friends with him in order to get my chance to play Cannon Fodder until 1997 when I got my own copy of the game. I don't like the SNES. As much as I make jokes about it and stuff, it's a cracking system. Like the controller is a brilliant controller. It feels right in your hand. It doesn't feel the way that the PlayStation 1 and 2 controller feels in my hand, because I mean I'm almost certain I've got PlayStation controller shaped hands, right? But the SNES controller itself is such a beautiful piece of kit that it never really felt constrictive, whereas I've played this version of the game on the Mega Drive and it was like I was going to get cramp in my thumbs trying to play it. On an original SNES controller, it still feels nice, it still feels good. Like I said, there's going to be some limitations because you don't have a mouse, you can't scroll over things, so therefore it's not the same type of game in total. But as a gaming experience on this console, it's really good. I genuinely enjoyed it.
Yeah, cool. All right. like I said before, you know, there are comparison videos on YouTube and whatnot, like their versions of this game, like in the consoles, and like, you know, there's some additions and differences to some of the other versions of the game. For example, 3D version has like, you know, like pseudo 3D models at the start of the game and whatnot. So all the versions of the game are a little bit different, but they all have the same core gameplay. They all seem like very good ports. I mean, like, you know, I actually think the Super NES version may be one of the weakest ports, only because the system was kind of weak compared to the other systems.
Mm-hmm.
But having said that though, this is still a very, very good port of the game. So it's like, and the control scheme is, you get used to it because, you know, just like any kind of type, anytime, so like any time that you have a game ported from a computer to a console, you're gonna have that, you're gonna have that issue. But did you? So do you think you guys like ever play Maniac Mansion like on the NES?
No.
Yes.
I think the only time I played Maniac Mansion was in Grim Fandango.
Yeah, same issue, because like, you know, you're trying to move around, you're slowly plodding along the cursor on the screen like the gamepad, which is not ideal, but I mean, like, it works. I mean, like, they did what they could like the control scheme. So it's like, you know, I understand it's frustrating, I understand it's not quite as effective in that version, but it does the job. Because like does the job of like, handling, handling the controls. Even though I agree with you, Ollie, it's not the same as mouse and keyboard. The best I can say about it, like, you get used to it. It works.
Yeah, but again, this is one of those things where, like, looking at it with 2021 eyes, it's mad to say that we're recording this in 2021, but and March in 2021. But like, back in those days, you only had 4 games. Like, whereas now, I was thinking about this, I was almost embarrassed because my son was helping me clean out the games room, and there's like a set of presses over in the corner, like cupboards, and it's just they're filled with games, like stacked up video games that I've collected over the last 35 years of video gaming. And I'm thinking back to the, like, Ollie 1995 Ollie, who had 4 games on his Genesis, and his friend Peter had 3 games on his SNES. And now, if I wanted to, I can go upstairs, take the SNES down, and pick from one of 60 games, which for some reason I own. Like, it's almost got to parody levels.
Yeah.
How much we collect these things. But back in those days,
well, not only that, games themselves are much more easier to obtain and cheaper these days than ever before either, because of things like Steam and GOG. So
yeah, I'm actually still talking about physical media. Like, I mean, I have a Steam account, which has 4 games on it, and 2 of those are Jackbox collections. So I'm not exactly a huge Steam guy, and one of the other ones is Hitman 1 and 2 combined, because they were giving it away for free. So I was I'll take that. Oh wait, no, that was Epic. But yeah, so I've got 3 games on Steam and 1 game on the Epic Media or Epic Game Store or whatever it is. Like, I'm much more into putting the disc into the machine and sitting down and playing it and having it in my hands. But the collection I have now is something that only a rich kid would have had in the 90s.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah.
And I found some of these, like, I have a version of, for example, just thinking of my N64, because I have a friend who did an N64 podcast, and I was collecting some of the games for him, and he gave them back to me when the podcast finished. It was called Ultra 64, and I have a bunch of games up there which I bought for like $4. Like, going on to eBay and getting a copy of Blast Corps or Blast Corps for €5 or whatever it was. And I remember back in the day thinking, I'm gonna have to save my pocket money for 9 months to be able to buy this. A year ago, I was able to buy a copy of it in perfect working order that I can put into my N64, and it cost me $5.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, good point. Anyway, so all things considered, starting to wrap things up here. excellent port of the game. The game still is quite fun to play these days as it was back then, I think. Like limitations aside, as far as like not having the actual song at the start or start like the pro scheme. It's a very good port of the game. It's still, it does a great job of combining like action with like strategy elements to it. It gets. I wish the game didn't get quite so difficult quite so fast. Because some of those like later missions are just absolutely brutal to go through. But all things considered, I mean, this is still. All things considered, I still think this is a fun game to play today. It's like the message of the game is still as powerful and is still as effective now like it was like during its release.
Yeah.
So, all in all, fun game. So, I'm glad you enjoyed it, Joe. And so, Ollie, I appreciate you coming on the podcast because you're the one who knew the most about this and the history, experiences, and whatnot. So, I want to thank you again for joining us and being able to share your experience and thoughts as far as the game went.
Well, yeah, anytime you're talking about a European-centric game and you want somebody to come on and chat about it, I'm always up for it. And if anything, it'll give me an excuse to dig out games or go looking for a copy. Like, oh, you want to talk about Earthworm Jim 2? No, I'll find the copy of Earthworm Jim 2.
So before I move on to eBay and cheats and final thoughts to wrap this up, do you have any final thoughts like about the game that you want to mention, like real quick, Ollie? Like anything else?
Yeah, just one thing that I was noticing for anybody listening. So it's a real-time strategy game, but this is not a real-time strategy game. It's such a weird combination. It's an action game that is controlled like a real-time strategy game. There's very few games I can think of that are like this, that aren't specifically made by Sensible or Gremlin. Like, it's a real one-off kind of genre that they created themselves. And it's all based on the fact that that's what Sensible did best, which was this kind of top-down to a little bit of an angled perspective, small sprites that have a lot of character built into them, and then gameplay which is designed to be simple but complex in the long run. So yeah, it's if you've never played a Cannon Fodder game, you've never played a game like Cannon Fodder. So for those of you listening, you could do a lot worse than finding a ROM of this and giving it a go. I guarantee you'll enjoy it. You might enjoy it better on the Amiga version, but you will enjoy it all the same. So yeah, give it a go, people who are listening.
Okay, and how about you, Joe? Like anything else?
It's a fun romp. Definitely give it a try. And don't be, like Ollie said, like although this is technically a RTS, it's more action than it is anything else, and it's fantastic. And who knows? If you like British humor, you'll probably pick up the little nuances and love it. And if you don't, well, then maybe you should be cultured a little bit more. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, cool. Yeah, definitely. There is a cheat code in this game. You can skip levels. If you select the password QNFJR, you can hit select during gameplay to skip to whatever mission that you want to go. So there was like one cheat code that the game had.
Cheating is for losers, Greg. Those of us who are purists, we never cheat. But also, if you could just say that again, so I can write it down. Actually, if there's one thing I miss most in video games, it's cheat codes.
I agree.
Yeah, that's
genuinely miss them. I miss the idea that, just some developer went, let's just stick this in. Like, here's a little code. If somebody puts it in and they've suddenly got big head mode, or somebody puts this in and CJ in GTA San Andreas now has a rocket launcher. Like,
right.
I miss that, and they just don't seem to exist anymore in even in structured formats. But like nowadays, people talk about, oh, I went into the code and I found this glitch that you can use. Like, well, that's fantastic, but I just want to hit XO triangle square 4 times and the up arrow, and now suddenly I've got the best sword in Dark Souls. Like, you know, you miss. I genuinely miss those little, just small things like that.
Yep.
Yeah, true. But yeah, so eBay pricing. As I mentioned before, I don't know why, but this game is not very common on eBay, and therefore, like it, the copies of the game do go for a lot of money. I think part of it's because that it was only released in Europe. It doesn't look like it had a big release in Europe though, for whatever reason. Probably because, as I already mentioned, most people those days were more computer gamers than console gamers, so I guess they didn't feel it was like that big of a market for it.
Mm-hmm.
So probably was not a very big print run. I found only 11 copies of this game available for sale on eBay at the time of doing this podcast, which goes back, and like in the history of 90 days, only 4 copies of the game recently sold. These were all by like European sellers. I mean, like they were willing to ship overseas, so this pricing I'm going to give you includes shipping. But you know, like all the copies of the game that came from Europe. So currently version of the game sold anywhere from three versions of the three of the 4 sales were cart only. Like I said, these prices include shipping. Those sold anywhere from $30, $50, and $60 for how much the game went for.
Mm-hmm.
A complete version of the game with the box and the manual ran for sold for $92. So yeah, so if you're looking for this game on cart, you can kind of expect to pay for it a bit because it is, like I said, European only, and you probably have to pay for the extra cost to have it to have shipped over the Atlantic to you. So definitely more pricier game because of that reason. But yeah, so if your friend still has the game these days, he probably could sell it for like quite a chunk of change.
Yeah. If you want to find something which is genuinely amazingly expensive, there is a book about sensible software, it was published by ROM, in 2013 or something, and I think copies.
Oh yeah, I've seen this book. Yeah.
I think copies of that go for 200 plus.
Wow.
Because it was such a limited run of the book. I know if you go onto Amazon, there's a second-hand copy for £127 at the minute. And I know this because I would like to buy a copy of this book. But I'm not paying £127 for a book. I mean, if it was a first edition Wheel of Time signed by Robert Jordan, maybe. This is my favorite book from my favorite author. But one of my favorite books from my favorite author. Book 5 is the best book in that series. But I'm not going to spend $127 just because I genuinely love Sensible Software. I loved all of their games. I followed them as much as a kid I was following. Like, I mean, if a game had Sensible in front of it, I was going to buy it. I bought Sensible Golf on the Amiga, for God's sake. I don't like golf, but it had it on. And I'll tell you one thing, it's a fantastic little golf game.
Yeah.
But, and I would like to read the book, but I'm not going to, £127 is what, €160 or dollars?
Yeah, I actually found the book online. It actually came out in 2013 by read-only memory. It sounds like if you missed the book back then, you're kind of SOL as far as trying to get a copy of it these days.
Yeah, I think it was what do you call it? Kickstartered.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, and then I think they only made something like 50 copies or 60 copies beyond the people who'd backed it on Kickstarter. And I'm assuming then that the only copies that ever sell now are the copies that went beyond the Kickstarter ones.
But at the same time, the book has actually been recognized as being so important that that BAFTA, which is the British Academy of Film and Television Arts, actually has a copy in their library. So they actually recognize the importance of the history that it covers. That's interesting.
Yeah, if any of your listeners have a copy and want to loan it to me, feel free.
Described here as being half art book, and half analysis, which is interesting too. So
yeah, they really go into how a small developer can rise up. Like Sensible were huge during the 16-bit era. Like I think I think they had 7 or 8 number 1 charted games in a row. And I think ROM they did a book about the Bitmap brothers as well. So they were the guys who like made Speedball and things like that. Like 2 small British companies who just made gangbusters and then fell apart on the move to 3D. Like they just couldn't handle it, and that's what happened to Sensible. Like they couldn't. None of the games that they tried to make in 3D came true. They really fell apart because we're trying to create a game called Love and Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll, and it was like, what's the best way to describe it? Would be in the style of Sensible games, but about doing crime and having fun. So like GTA before GTA was GTA.
Yeah, exactly.
And they could never get it off the ground. But the screenshots for that game look amazing. I would do anything to find a copy of, like, you know, where you were saying like sometimes people sit on them. That's one of those things where someday I hope somebody goes, oh yeah, well we actually do have a working version of the game. I've just never bothered to release it before.
Yeah, they were also working. So they were also working like on a PlayStation action game like called Have a Nice Day, which also never came out. And apparently, like, you know, like and like the company spent so much time and money on those 2 games that never actually saw the light of day. That's one of the reasons that they like eventually had to close. But got bought out. Like I said before, Co-Masters that you'll pick them up eventually. But so interesting. But I mean, like, you know, like I said, Ollie, they had a lot of great games. The Sensible World, Sensible World, so the Sensible World of Soccer franchise is still going strong today. So I mean, like, you know, that just proved like how strong, how good those games were. So, but I will check eBay real quick here to see if there's any copies of the book available on there. So you already Amazon, but anyway, so while I'm doing this, why don't we wrap up? Ollie, do you have any other do you have any podcasts you do on a regular basis you want to plug? Any other any other projects that you want to talk about?
Let me see. So my main podcast, which I was doing with my partner, my best friend, I'm not sure how to describe her, Emily, was called Best Acquaintances, and we finished that up just because, you know, we'd done 150 episodes and we were like the podcast has kind of run its course at this point. But I do another one with a good friend of mine named Sarah. She's a medieval historian, and we watch medieval set movies together, and then she rips them apart on what they get right and what they get wrong. So if you just want somebody who's an expert in her field watching Braveheart and then telling you that they've got the wrong type of armor for the warriors, and then her friend Ollie sitting there going, yeah, but there's a good bit where he cuts off a dude's hand. So like there's 2 extremes of responses. Like she goes into the nitty gritty and I'm there going, yeah, but you know, it's really good and exciting and stuff. So I've kind of stepped away from being the main guest, but I'll still pop up every now and then. I recently did an episode on Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with her, which was a lot of fun. So yeah, check it out. It's called Media Evil, and I highly recommend it. So even on the episodes I'm not on, it's worth listening to.
Cool. Okay. All right. And Joe, how about you?
You can find me on Twitter at JoeSucks30. Probably the best. I still do a podcast, but I mean, I'm not doing anything with it at the moment, so I'm not going to bother mentioning it.
Yeah, true. So, I can be found at the SNES podcast at yahoo.com, or we also have a Facebook group where you're welcome to join us. Just to finish up your thought real quick here, Ollie, I did take a quick look at that Sensible Software book. There's something on eBay, and Amazon does have some copies, but you're right, the cheapest copy available on Amazon is Amazon. It's like, you know, it's like $350.
Yeah,
so
it's $350 is about $300 more than I'm willing to spend for that book.
It's too bad this. Yeah, it's really too bad this book's not It's really too bad this book's not been this book's not been made available in like Kindle format, for example. But because
there is a way to find it, but I would genuinely feel bad, and I mean normally I don't feel bad about finding stuff on the internet, if you get what I'm saying, but I would feel bad about
print
that.
Well.
It's
I feel the same way about
coffee table book,
games,
Greg. I want it on my coffee
yeah.
table, you know.
Yeah.
Find it on the internet and just print it out yourself.
But
Here's a PDF I printed out.
yeah, I know. Reading versus having two different things. So it's in this kind of book, I would probably want to read. I wouldn't want to keep, but
I would want to keep it. I want a copy of it.
But okay, all right then. Well, as always, Joe, thank you for taking time on your day to join us.
Of course.
Join us like this podcast, and like always again, thank you very much for taking time out of your day with the time differences, and everything, to come on here and bring us a game, talk about share experiences of the word or whatnot. Yeah, hopefully we'll have you back on the podcast again sometime soon.
Yeah, I'd love to anytime. What I'm going to do now is go see if I can find my dot matrix printer and get that authentic 1990s version of the book I'm going to print out.
There you go.
So we're going from one European-based game to one Japanese-based game next time around, because Joe is picking the next game of the podcast. And what did you want to cover this time, Joe?
We're going to check out the fun and whimsical game of UFO Keimen Yakisoban. And I'm sure I butchered that, but yeah.
I thought there was a Japanese person in the room. What's going on?
You're too kind.
What you're saying before off mic has like a tie-in to like a ramen company?
Yeah, apparently UFO is
a
a ramen company, and this was a marketing tool to where like the mascot is a superhero, and it's bonkers. Like it's fun, but it's bonkers. Legit bonkers.
Okay.
I don't want to spoil it.
But interesting. Okay. All right. Well, we will get into that next time for sure. So, again, thank everybody for taking time to join us today. We always appreciate it. And everybody out there, stay safe. Take care, and we'll talk to you again soon, hopefully. Later, all.
Bye.
Bye.
Nintendo controls 80% of the video market. But no matter how you play the game, or which game you play, things definitely have come a long way since Pac-Man.
Now you're playing with power. Super power.